Ever get this feeling like when we learned history in school, like there were these huge gaps missing, people who must have made a difference but just never ended up in the textbooks.
Oh, absolutely. It's like we only get the highlights, right? The big names, the major battles. But what about everyone else?
Exactly. And that's what has me so fascinated by this book you shared, The Small and the Mighty.
Sharon McMahon. Oh, she's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. It's like she went digging through the attics of American history and found all these incredible stories, these hidden figures who had such a huge impact.
It's amazing how she brings them to life, right? Like you feel like you could have a cup of coffee with Gouverneur Morris or bake a pie with Clara Brown.
Seriously. Okay, so before we dive into the individual stories, can you give us the gist? Like, what's McMahon's main point in writing this book?
Well, she's arguing that American history is way more complicated than just the great man theory,
Yeah.
the idea that it's all about presidents and generals.
Right, right.
McMahon says, look, it's the ordinary people, the ones working behind the scenes, the ones who never get statues erected in their honor, who often make the biggest difference.
And she uses some pretty interesting characters to prove her point, right? I mean, Gouverneur Morris, one of the founding fathers, writing the Constitution, all while sporting a whalebone prosthetic leg. Talk about a visual.
I know. It's such a great example of how she uses these kind of quirky details to hook you in.
Totally. But then you realize it's more than just a good story. It makes you think, how does a disability, something so often stigmatized, especially back then, shape a person's worldview? How does it influence the way they approach something as massive as building a new government?
Exactly. It challenges our assumptions about historical figures, makes them more real, more human.
It's like we get so caught up in the marble statues and the official portraits that we forget these were real people with flaws and struggles and, interesting fashion choices.
Exactly. It's those imperfections, those little details that make history come alive and remind us that it's made by people just like us.
And sometimes those imperfections are what make their accomplishments even more impressive.
Oh, absolutely. And that brings us to someone who embodies that perfectly. Clara Brown. This woman was the definition of resilience.
Seriously, escaping slavery and then watching 700 miles while cooking for a whole caravan. I can barely make it to the grocery store without needing a nap.
Right. She was incredible. And it wasn't just about escaping either. After gaining her own freedom, she dedicated her life to helping others escape slavery through the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
She saw a chance not just for herself, but for a whole community to build something new, something better in the West.
See, that's what I love about these stories. It's like flipping those classic images of westward expansion on their head.
Yeah.
It wasn't all about rugged individualism.
Not at all. Clara Brown's story shows that the West was built by people from all walks of life. And for many formerly enslaved people, it represented a chance for freedom and opportunity.
So we've got someone like Gouverneur Morris working within the system, trying to make it more just. Then you have someone like Clara Brown forging her own path, defying incredible odds. Are these two sides of the same coin? Or are we talking about completely different ways of making an impact?
I think what ties them together is this incredible dedication, this willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than themselves.
Okay, I see that. And that brings us to another figure who definitely knew a thing or two about fighting for a better future. Virginia Randolph, a black educator during the Jim Crow era. Talk about facing an uphill battle.
She was remarkable. But to really grasp the significance of her work, you have to understand the context. Jim Crow South. Education was segregated. Black people were systematically denied opportunities.
So how did she make any progress in that kind of environment?
Virginia Randolph was strategic. She knew how to play the game, but she never compromised her values.
What do you mean?
She secured funding for schools, often appealing to wealthy white philanthropists. But here's the thing. She insisted on hiring qualified black teachers, and she created these really innovative teaching methods focused on practical skills and self-sufficiency. She understood that education was about empowering her students, giving them the tools to create a better future for themselves.
It's amazing how she was able to navigate that system, to work within it and challenge it at the same time.
It speaks to her understanding of the power dynamics at play. She knew that sometimes you had to speak the language of those in power to create real change for those who had been marginalized.
It's like she was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers,
Yeah.
thinking 5 steps ahead.
Exactly. And her legacy, it's huge. Thousands of black students in the South got an education because of her.
It makes you think about those arguments, right? About how education is the great equalizer.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about equal rights, although that's obviously crucial. It's about opportunity. It's about giving people the tools to create a better life for themselves and their communities.
Speaking of opportunity, McMahon also talks about Julius Rosenwald. This guy was the president of Sears, Roebuck and Company.
Right.
Right. Not exactly who you'd picture as a champion of social justice.
Right. But Rosenwald, he was a different breed. He believed deeply in the power of education, especially for Black Americans in the South.
And he put his money where his mouth was, right?
Big time. He partnered with Booker T. Washington to build, get this, thousands of schools across the South for Black students. Thousands.
Okay, this guy's playing on a whole other level.
He understood that real change wasn't about handouts. It was about investing in people, giving them the resources to build a better future for themselves.
So we've got these incredible stories of resilience, determination, people fighting for a more just world. But McMahon doesn't shy away from the darker chapters of American history either, right? Like the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II.
Yeah, and the story of Daniel Inouye during that time is just, it's
Oh,
incredible.
let me what he did again.
So Inouye was a Japanese American, right? And even though his own family was sent to an internment camp, he volunteered to fight for the U.S. Army.
Wait, he volunteered.
What?
He was willing to fight for a country that was actively discriminating against him.
It's pretty mind-blowing. And he didn't just serve. This guy was a war hero, received the Medal of Honor, later became a U.S. Senator.
Talk about a walking contradiction to all the fear and prejudice of that time.
It's a story that really makes you think about patriotism, about what it means to believe in the ideals of a nation, even when that nation isn't living up to those ideals.
It's a powerful reminder that history is complicated, right? It's not always black and white, heroes and villains.
Exactly. And it's full of these kind of uncomfortable truths that we have to grapple with.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Stories of triumph, stories of struggle, stories that make you question everything you thought you knew about American history.
That's the beauty of history, though, isn't it? It's not just dates and names in a textbook. It's about real people making real choices, facing real challenges. And those stories, even the tough ones, they have so much to teach us.
Absolutely. And I think what ties it all together, what McMahon really drives home in The Small and the Mighty, is that we're all part of this grand story. We all have the power to make a difference, to leave our own mark on the world, even if it feels small at the time. Who knows? Maybe someday someone will be reading about us, wondering what we were like, how we saw the world, and how we found the courage to make our own small but mighty contribution to history.